Murdered a Podcast. I'm your host, AB. And this week on Mama Murdered a Podcast, we are finally jumping into the case. The case that first piqued my interest into true crime when I was way too young to even be thinking about murder. And all that to say, I've always been a morbid little bitch. So if you've been here a while, then you probably have already guessed that means I'm going to attempt to do my very best to cover the JonBenet Ramsey case. So strap in because this is going to be a long one, and at this point, I'm not even sure how many parts this is going to be. My hope is to finish the JonBenet series by Christmas, although I doubt I'll be able to do a deep dive and cover everything in just 2 or 3 episodes. So it's pretty likely that this case will come with us into the new year, and that's okay. I am also going to try my very best to stay unbiased because honestly, I still go back and forth with what I think happened. So I'm going to try to keep my own thoughts and opinions to myself. And like I said, this is going to be a long one. So with all that being said, and without further ado, let's get it. JonBenet Patricia Ramsey was born on August 5th in 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia, to her parents, Patsy and John Ramsey. And maybe this is partly why this case resonated with me so much even as a kid, because JonBenet was only born like 3 years before me, so she wasn't much older than me when she died. Of course, it doesn't help that I would see her pictures on every tabloid every year around Christmas for my entire childhood. Now, JonBenet's parents, Patsy and John, got a little creative when they gave her the name JonBenet at birth, because John's name is JonBenet Ramsey, so they took part of his first name and part of his middle name and made one name that would work for a girl. And then JonBenet, of course, had her mom's name as her middle name, because obviously Patsy is sometimes used for a nickname for Patricia, which is actually JonBenet's middle name. So that's how we got JonBenet Patricia Ramsey. So she had a little bit of both of her parents' names all smashed into one to make one name. It's always been a little bit weird to me that they just kind of smushed all of their own names together in a way to make her whole last name, but she's not my child and that is none of my business. So let's get to know some of the members of the Ramsey family before we jump straight into the timeline. So, JonBenet's mom, Patsy Ramsey, was a former Miss West Virginia and a former beauty queen. She also had a degree in journalism, so Patsy was both brains and beauty, which is probably what drew John Ramsey in to begin with. She and John met in Atlanta while Patsy was studying journalism, and John was recently divorced. John had served in the Navy and started his own business, and he had done all of this before he and Patsy had ever met. And he was able to do all of those things before he and Patsy met because he was 14 years older than Patsy. But nonetheless, the two seemed happy together and they ended up living the kind of life that a lot of people only dream about sharing with somebody. John and Patsy married in 1980 after they only dated for a few months, which, you'll have that. John and Patsy would go on to have 2 kids together. They had their first, who was a boy who they named Burke Ramsey. Burke was born in 1987, and then the couple welcomed JonBenet in 1990, like I already said. John did have 3 other kids from his previous marriage, and then, of course, he had Burke and JonBenet with Patsy. So I wanted to try to keep the details here short and sweet because there is so much to get through within the actual case itself. But John's business, Advanced Product Group, would actually go on to merge with 2 other companies in 1988, making John even more successful. And the new business name after the merge would be changed to Access Graphics, and it was something to do with security computer systems. Don't ask me, I'm not at all tech savvy. But what I do know is that the merge made John go from a very, very rich man to a very, very wealthy man. And JonBenet was only about a year old or so when Patsy and John moved the family from Atlanta to Colorado. The house that John and Patsy bought for the family to live in Colorado was massive. It was somewhere around 7,000 square foot, and the housekeepers that had previously worked for the Ramseys have said that this house was kind of set up like a maze. Like, even knowing your way around this house, it still wasn't hard to kind of get turned around within the house, which I think becomes more interesting as we get deeper, but let's continue. The house was massive, had 7 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, and a finished basement within a 4-floor layout plan. Now, shortly after the family moved to Colorado and got settled into their new home, John's company was bought by Lockheed Martin, where John was the president and CEO of the company. There was also an article that I found that was dated December 21st, 1996. So this would have been just 5 days before JonBenet was murdered. This article said that Access Graphics, the company that John had merged with and now was the CEO and president of, had just recently hit its $1 billionth in sales. This article even named John Ramsey, saying, quote, John Ramsey, president of Access Graphics, thanked about 300 employees at the gathering, and he told them that it couldn't have happened without them. The $1 billion in sales is about a 25% increase over the $800 million the company posted last year, and Ramsey forces continued growth. So like I already said, the Ramsey family wasn't just your regular people rich. They were straight up wealthy. There's a difference, trust me. And John Ramsey being so publicly recognized in articles and things of the sort could have possibly made the family a target. But then again, John wasn't the only one who was kind of publicly in the spotlight, because Patsy was well known for her lavish parties and her love of Christmas. Patsy was especially known for her Christmas parties and for the fact that she was known to have a Christmas tree in virtually every room in their big-ass house. She would also send out these Christmas cards. Well, I don't know if you could really call them Christmas cards, because it was more like a short magazine about the family and what all they had done for the whole last year. And then one year, instead of doing a magazine Christmas card, Patsy ended up sending out a whole-ass movie that was solely about the family and the things that Patsy was kind of, proud of. This was Patsy's way of keeping all their family and friends informed about the newest happenings with her, John, and the kids. Essentially, it sounds like bragging. Because she would list the things that the kids had done or achieved and, everything within that year. I don't know, this very much seems like a rich people thing to me, but I could very well be wrong. Patsy was also interviewed about the Ramseys' house, and their house was in a magazine. And then Patsy would also offer tours of the house to the public. It was something that she worked really hard on decorating and keeping up and keeping beautiful, and I guess she wanted to share it with anybody who was interested. And I'm only mentioning these things that Patsy did to show how many complete strangers would have been inside of the house, or at the very least had some kind of access to the Ramsey house. And this is in no way me saying that JonBenet's death is Patsy's fault for being proud of their home. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm also not directly pointing guilt towards Patsy for any of this. I'm simply pointing out the fact that the Ramsey home was open to a lot of people, both family and friends and strangers, and that this could possibly be one of the ways that the killer was able to find their way around the house. So, JonBenet's killer did find their way around the house, and they did it without being heard or seen by anybody else in the house. But let's keep going, because once the family was in Colorado, that's when JonBenet became a pageant girly. She was adorable, and these pageant pictures are probably the ones that you'll remember being splashed all over the cover of literally every magazine in the 90s. JonBenet was deep into the pageant world, winning titles like Miss Colorado, America's Royal Miss, Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, Little Miss Merry Christmas, and so many more. But in order to enter and win these pageants, JonBenet would have her hair lightened to a bleach blonde color, her face would be plastered with layers and layers of makeup, and she even wore a flipper to cover the spots where her missing baby teeth were. And I will absolutely not be giving my opinion on kids in pageants because that is so controversial. And the media always kind of portrays this idea that Patsy forced JonBenet into doing pageants. Kind of like since Patsy had been into them when she was younger, that somehow she was vicariously living through JonBenet and making her do pageants whether she wanted to or not. But I read something where JonBenet's uncle was talking about this exact thing. And her uncle basically said that the media and the public focused so much on the fact that JonBenet was a pageant baby, but he says that pageants were such a small part of who JonBenet was as a person. It was like, yes, she absolutely did do pageants, and she won a lot of them. And she was good at them. Also pretty well known for her age group amongst other pageant people. But he basically said that JonBenet was so much more than just a makeup-wearing, crown-toting, toddler pageant princess. She was also just a regular, very normal kid. And even though the media likes to splash the beauty pageant pictures all over the covers every December, there are also tons and tons of pictures of JonBenet in her normal, everyday life setting. and without a fake tooth flipper thing, and without mounds of makeup and sparkly dresses. And in those pictures, she does look like every other 6-year-old girl in the 90s. And I actually want to read you what JonBenét's uncle said because I think he explains it so much better than me trying to paraphrase. Her uncle said, quote, "She was just a normal, happy child. Just a good kid. The beauty pageant thing, that was a very, very small part of her life. 99% of her life was spent as a typical 6-year-old. What we see on TV and in pictures, that's not who JonBenet was." So although JonBenet did pageants and although she was very good at them, it wasn't her entire identity like the media sometimes portrays it as. And if you know this case, then you know that there are a group of people that feel like JonBenet was forced into doing pageants because Patsy had done them and won them in the past before she became a mom. And everyone thinks that JonBenet was forced into doing pageants, but they're all people who didn't actually know JonBenet or the Ramsey family at all. Because the people that did know the Ramseys, they all say that JonBenet was never forced into doing any pageant that she didn't like, that it was her choice whether she did them or not. But then I saw where a girl who was friends with JonBenet as a child remembered being at the Ramsey house on a playdate with JonBenet, and this friend kind of brought up how many trophies and tiaras and things like that JonBenet had won. I guess they were like sitting on a shelf for display. And according to this friend, she said that JonBenet told her that those trophies and awards and tiaras, that they weren't really hers, that they were more for her mom, Patsy. So take that how you want. And now that we know a little bit more about the family and their social status and their day-to-day life, let's go to Christmas Day 1996, when this case kind of starts. JonBenet and Burke woke up, and Patsy and John watched the kids tear into their Christmas gifts. JonBenet had gotten a new bicycle that morning for Christmas that she rode around outside for a little bit. And then the Ramseys just kind of hung around the house, and the kids played with their new toys until later on in the evening. That evening, the Ramseys left their house for a Christmas party. John and Patsy were close friends with Fleet and Priscilla White, and the Whites were the ones throwing the Christmas party. So the entire Ramsey family attended this Christmas party at Fleet and Priscilla White's house. JonBenet and Burke opened up Christmas gifts there with the Whites, and everyone ate dinner and just kind of hung out. It was Christmas Day, everybody was exhausted, it had been a long day with lots of excitement. And naturally, as 6-year-olds tend to do, JonBenet fell asleep in the car on the way home from the party at the White's house. So once John and Patsy get back home and they realize that JonBenet had fallen asleep, John says that he carried JonBenet up to her bedroom and put her to bed. And this is the story that you'll get in almost every book, every documentary, every news article, and it'll say that John carried a sleeping JonBenet up to her room where he put her to bed. But then I also saw where John said at a different point that he'd read a book to JonBenet. So why would you read a book to a child that is already asleep? And I don't know if this is maybe just the police wrote something down wrong, or maybe someone was backtracking on what they had originally said happened. I'm not sure. And then later on during a police questioning, Patsy does say that JonBenet was asleep when they got home and that John carried her up to her bed and put her to sleep. And, this is a point of controversy in this case. Was she asleep? Was she not asleep? Did John put her to bed, or did he read a book to her and then put her to bed? But this could be something as simple as, since Patsy wasn't the one that had put JonBenet in bed that night, that maybe she wouldn't have known if John read a book to JonBenet or not. So this JonBenet being asleep or awake when the Ramseys got home is either a really big deal or it's absolutely not a big deal at all. And that all depends on where you stand on this case and what you think happened. And then it could just be that John and Patsy simply just misremembered very small, unimportant things about that night that seemed so typical for them at the time. It really could just be human error. But either way, JonBenet went to bed that night wearing a long sleeve, long john type of outfit. And I don't know if everybody calls them long johns or if that's what we call them in the South and nobody knows what I'm talking about. So if you don't, they are like a woven knit long sleeve shirt and pants set that you would wear to keep warm. And it was at about 9:30 p.m. when JonBenet was put in bed for the night. So everyone sleeps through the night at the Ramsey house. There were no noises or glass breaking, no alarms went off, and no one heard a thing. So the next morning on December 26th, 1996, Patsy Ramsey woke up sometime around 5 a.m., and according to Patsy, After she woke up, she threw on the same outfit that she'd worn the night before to the party at the White's house. And I'm not sure why, but this one small detail has always bothered me and stayed with me throughout the entirety of this case. Every time I think about this case, I think about this. Because wealthy people usually don't wear the same outfit more than a handful of times. But Patsy's putting the same exact outfit on that she'd worn the night before. I don't know why, but that has always struck me as so freaking weird. But Patsy had gotten up early because the entire Ramsey family had plans of getting on one of their 2 private jets to go meet up with John's older kids from his previous marriage to celebrate Christmas with them. So Patsy walked from the 3rd floor down the back staircase of the house to go downstairs. This is when she noticed a note. And strap into your seats because this ransom note is about to take us on a curvy, windy dirt road that you've never been down before. This note was addressed to John, and it was 2.5 pages long, and it seems like Patsy only just kind of skimmed over the note quickly and then ran into JonBenet's room to make sure if she was there or not, which she was not. Patsy immediately ran back in to let John know about the letter, and she let him know that JonBenet was gone as she called the police. And I'm going to read you the entire 2.5-page ransom note, and I'll even kind of give you some of my random inner thoughts about this ransom note. But before we get to the ransom note, let's talk about the 911 call that Patsy made. The 911 call came in on December 26, 1996 at 5:52 a.m., and I'm going to play the call now.
911 emergency. Police. What's going on? 515th Street. What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hi, please explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left and our daughter's gone. A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter? 6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old. How long ago was it? I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's gone. Does it say who took her? What? Does it say who took her? I don't know. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? It says SBTC. Victory. Please. Okay, what's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please. I'm sending an officer over, okay? Please. Do you know how long she's been gone? No, I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she right here? Oh my God, please. Okay, calm. Is somebody? I am, honey. Please. Take a deep breath. Please, okay? Hurry. Patsy.
Okay, so we will get to the ransom note, but first let's talk about this 911 call. Because the case of JonBenet Ramsey is one that people will theorize about until the end of time. Or until DNA finally gives us the answers that we don't have now. So, first of all, Patsy is calling to report her 6-year-old daughter missing. But she never once says JonBenet's name. She doesn't describe what JonBenet looks like or what she was last seen wearing. None of that. She just gives the address, says her daughter's missing, and then hangs up on the 911 dispatcher. Or at least Patsy thought that she'd hung up with the 911 dispatcher. Because people have torn this call to absolute shreds. They've cleaned up the audio and removed some of the background noise. And depending on who you talk to about the very end snippet of this 911 call, you'll be told that people hear a variety of different phrases. The 911 dispatcher distinctly remembered this call for a few reasons. One, because it was her last 911 call of the night before her shift was over. Secondly, she said something just felt off about the call itself. And she also says that after the call was thought to be hung up, that she thought she heard voices in the background talking. And that those voices had gone from like a panicked and frenzied Patsy to talking normally, just like that. But there was one clip that I found that enhanced the audio and removed the background noise, and you can actually make out 3 different voices. And I'm going to play just the very, very end of the 911 call a few times. And then you tell me in the question and answer section under Spotify what you heard. I'm also going to tell you what I think I heard. So let's play that.
Patsy?
I just realized you're probably not going to hear what I heard. just for the simple fact of the way that I had to insert that clip. But you can look it up online. I'll try to find one to link under the episode description. But people are convinced that there is a male voice in the background of this call when Patsy thought she had already hung up the phone. People also assume that this male voice is the voice of John Ramsey, and you can in the right videos or the right audios, you can clearly hear John say, or a man in the room say, "We're not speaking to you." And this is said in a very much like a dad voice, like a stern talking to voice. And then there's a female voice, obviously assumed to be Patsy Ramsey, that says, like, "Oh, Jesus, what did you do?" And then there's a third voice. This third voice very much sounds like a child. And it sounds like this child asks, "Well, what did you find?" Which is, oh God, so creepy. So we'll probably come back to this 911 call at some point as we get further into the theories. But for now, before we go any further, I want to read you the 2.5-page ransom note that Patsy found on her way downstairs. This ransom note says, and I quote, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate-sized acheté to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I'd advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an easier delivery of the money and hence an earlier pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I'd advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police or FBI, will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned. We are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions, and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny, as well as the authorities. Do not try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so do not think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good Southern common sense of yours. It's up to you now, John. Victory. SBTC. First of all, my first question is we now know that Patty called the police as soon as she skimmed over this ransom note and realized what it was. Would you call the police if your kid had been kidnapped and this ransom note specifically says not to call the police or she dies? I'm not going to lie to y'all, I have honest to God never been able to answer that question truthfully, even just to myself. What would you do? Because like I said, I'm really not sure. What I am sure about, though, is that this note is weird for me for so many reasons. But the first reason being that this entire letter starts out making it sound like this kidnapping is being executed by a number of people, and then it's like the person writing the letter forgets that part, because it says, I will call you between 8 and 10 p.m. It doesn't say someone from our group will call you, and it doesn't say someone will get in touch with you. But instead, it says, I will call you, which is the first reason that I feel like this ransom note is just a prop in this case and nothing more. And that's the same way that the killer, or at the very least, the person who wrote this letter, they went from we to I and then back to we towards the end when the ransom note says, you stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. And then that sentence is followed up with, follow our instructions and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. So it seems like the person that wrote this ransom note is going back and forth between I and we, and then us sometimes, which only makes me think that this ransom note was never really part of the plan. Like, whoever was responsible for writing this note, they didn't think to do it until after the fact. Just kind of like an afterthought. Now, another reason that I say that this is a weird-ass ransom note is because it is 2.5 pages long and comprised of 373 words. What kidnapper is taking the time to write an entire handwritten letter on a legal pad that they did not even bring with them to the house, but instead wrote it inside of the house and on a legal pad that was already inside of the Ramsey house? Investigators were also able to determine later on that this letter had been written with a pen that was also already inside of the Ramsey house. So like I said, this note was compiled of a grand total of 373 words and has been timed to see how long it would take an average person to write this entire letter. It was concluded that it would have taken somewhere around 21 minutes for the average person to write this exact same letter verbatim. That is just copying the letter. That's not even sitting down and thinking about what you're going to write, so I would imagine that it would have taken longer than just the 21 minutes. Like, what kidnapper is spending that kind of time inside of a house where they either plan to kidnap somebody's daughter or kill somebody's daughter? Because I feel like that's some world's dumbest criminals type shit. Now, something else that I have never been able to shake about this letter is the fact that the person who wrote this ransom note says something along the lines of, "The delivery is going to be exhausting. I'd advise you be well rested." And this very much gives me mom vibes, or female vibes at the very least. Like, I truly just cannot imagine a world where a man is worried about another man being well rested for a kidnapping exchange. You know what I mean? That just seems more like something that your mom or your grandma would tell you before a big exam or before your graduation. Not something that a man would say that is supposedly taking your child for ransom. I don't know. And then can we just address the fact that this ransom letter was made out to Mr. Ramsey instead of Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey? That's always been weird to me. And I'm not even sure why. And then I think the thing that is the most weird out of everything about this ransom note is the fact that there were multiple copies of this ransom note found at the Ramsey house. Like someone had started writing it, addressed to Mr. and Mrs., and then decided that they'd only address it to John and not Patsy. Or even the both of them. There were 2 copies of this ransom note where it had been started, and then it was crumpled up and then thrown into the trash so that they could start over. But I have so many questions about this note because they just don't add up to me. And it's just things that I wonder on my own. Like, why would a bad guy, a kidnapper, put away the pen and the notepad back where he got it? He put it back where he got it, respectfully. Because I just don't get it. And then the last thing that I'll point out is, probably not the last thing, I lie a lot when I say that, but something else I'll point out is that at the beginning of this letter, it starts out with Mr. Ramsey. Now, by the end of it, the writer seems to have gotten more comfortable because towards the end of the letter it says, "Don't try to grow a brain, John." Which, I don't know, maybe if you just spent 21 minutes writing them a note, then you might forget that you're supposed to be writing a ransom note and not a casual note to a friend. It's just really weird. Every single thing about this note is weird as shit to me. Like, I feel like a ransom note is supposed to be as short as possible, because why would you want to give them more evidence to use later on to, like, compare your handwriting to? Like, I feel like a kidnapping note should say, "I have your kid. I want X amount of money. I will call you at this time." The end. That's it. That's all you need. That's enough. And I realize that I'm talking a lot about this 911 call and about this ransom note. And to me, these are 2 of the most important pieces of information that we have in this case. And I'll probably end up talking about them more as we keep going. But the last thing that I wanted to point out about this ransom note is that John and Patsy Ramsey are rich. Like rich, like wealthy rich. Trust me, again, there's a difference. Why would this kidnapper be asking for such a small amount of ransom money? Like, John Ramsey is a literal multi-millionaire at this point. These kidnappers could have asked for $3 million, and he would have had it in the bank to give them. I feel like $118,000 is, for one, very specific. It's a very specific number amount. For 2, That seems like it would be chump change to John Ramsey, who again owns a 7,000 square foot house and 2 personal jets. And not just that, but typically if you're willing to go as far as to take someone's whole ass kid, I feel like you would be asking for a lot more than $118,000. But again, what do I know? I'm not a kidnapper. And this note is just like the 911 call. It will be analyzed until we finally learn the truth about this case. And just like the 911 call, people have looked into this ransom note like you would not believe. And I don't even mean just regular Joe Schmoes looking into this ransom note. I mean people who specialize in a list of things so long that I'm not even going to list them here. But what I will list is what they found when they analyzed this ransom note. In the first paragraph of this note, it almost seems like whoever wrote the letter was trying to disguise their handwriting and possibly even make it look and sound like maybe the writer spoke English as a second language. Because in the first paragraph, there are words that are misspelled, there's grammar and punctuation, they're all over the place. And then as the letter continues, the spelling errors are magically fixed and the punctuation is right on point. Now, handwriting analysis have tried to match this ransom note's writing to someone inside of the Ramsey house like John, Patsy, or Burke. And we will talk about that in depth as we get further into this series. But for now, a forensic linguist profiler named Jim Fitzgerald put together a linguistic profile about what kind of writer the author of this ransom note was. Because this is when it was determined that the writing ability of the person who wrote this letter was high, and the English was likely their first language. It was also determined that the person who wrote this letter was likely an adult, probably someone 25 years or older. And then lastly, it was determined that it was likely that the person that wrote this ransom note was a woman. There were also lots of phrases from this ransom note that had been used in movies, including movies like Dirty Harry, Speed, and Ransom. Now, one more thing to mention is that on December 23rd, 1996, so this would have only been 3 days before JonBenet was found dead in the basement of the Ramsey family house, which, trust me, I realize we haven't even gotten there yet. But on December 23rd, 1996, there was a 911 call placed from the Ramsey house. Now, there had been a Christmas party going on at the time that the 911 call was made. The dispatch tried to call the number back with no answer, so an officer was sent out to the Ramsey house where it was kind of just assumed that it was one of the kids that had dialed 911, or that maybe it had been dialed by mistake somehow. But, hear me out, what if JonBenet's killer was at this Christmas party and dialed 911 to see about how long it would take the police to respond to the call? Maybe like a practice run, if you will. The 911 call was made at 6:48 p.m., and then the phone was hung up immediately afterwards. Again, the police tried calling back, no answer, they sent someone out. The officer that was sent out determined that the 911 call was either an accident or apparent, like I said, but if the kidnapper had never been inside of the Ramsey house, then how would they know how to find their way around the house? Because even the housekeepers that had worked for the family have said that it was super easy to get turned around inside of this already massive house. And again, I realize that we haven't even talked about the police showing up after the 911 call that Patsy made. We haven't found the body yet. But I warned you that this was going to be a super long series. So even though I wanted this episode to be longer, I really think this is a perfect stopping point. So that when we come back next week, we can be able to talk about what happened when the police showed up to the Ramsey house after the 911 call was made by Patsy. So, I hate to kind of cut it short, but I really feel like that's going to be the best way to tell the story without chopping off in the middle and picking back up next week. So, it sucks all we got through was the 911 call and the letter in this almost 45-minute long episode. But this is who I am as a human, and you signed up for this. So, let's do a review of the week, and then I have to go finish wrapping Christmas presents. And so do you probably. Get on it. So, the review of the week this week comes from NS in Oklahoma. This one was left recently because I asked y'all to go leave some reviews so that I don't run out of ones to write. Still go do that. This one comes from Apple Podcasts, and it says, my absolute favorite 5 stars. I was so happy to find you on TikTok. It led me to your amazing podcast. I love how you make these horrific situations into a piece of our hearts. You work so hard to be true and unbiased, and we can see that in every episode. I binged all 62 episodes, and now I can't wait for next week. Keep doing what you're doing. You're the best. No, ma'am, you're the best. Thank you very much. So, let's do it again. Same time, same place, next Wednesday. See you then.
That's how my mama murdered a podcast.